Although only ruins remain of Sparta, its legend continues to live on through the ages. The name of Sparta has inspired writers, military commanders, and rulers alike, symbolizing not only military might but also strict order, a readiness for self-sacrifice, and iron discipline. Sparta forged not merely a city, but an entire historical saga that proved more enduring than time and stone. Even after its downfall, Sparta continued to stir the minds and imaginations of people. During the Roman Empire, emperors like Augustus and Hadrian visited the remnants of the once great city, admiring its simplicity, devotion to law, and austere way of life. Rituals were revived, though more as theatrical performances than genuine expressions of faith. Spartan youths were still subjected to corporal punishment at the altar of Artemis Orthia, but no longer as preparation for war. Instead, it was for the entertainment of foreign visitors. Sparta had become a museum of itself, where its past was reenacted for public amusement. However, it wasn't only the Romans who perpetuated the myth of Sparta. Early Christians, while critical of pagan traditions, often held Spartan moral principles, such as a sense of duty, self-denial, and devotion to society, in high regard. Later, during the Renaissance, thinkers revisited classical texts and saw in Sparta an ideal of civic virtue. Philosophers engaged in endless debates about its merits, discussing whether Sparta was a cruel society of masters and slaves or a model of a pure republic, free from corruption. In the Age of Enlightenment, Sparta found new admirers. Jean-Jacques Rousseau extolled the Spartan societal model as an antidote to decadence and luxury. He argued that true freedom could only be achieved through self-sacrifice and unity of will. In his view, Sparta was not merely a historical artifact but an example to be emulated. At the same time, others saw Sparta as nothing more than a tyranny, where individual liberty was suppressed by strict conformity. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, nationalist movements across Europe idealized Sparta. Military academies adopted its training methods, and political leaders invoked Leonidas and Thermopylae in their speeches to ignite patriotic fervor. The myth of Sparta continued to evolve, becoming a symbol of heroic last stands, choosing death over dishonor, and unwavering loyalty. Sparta, the triumph and tragedy of a heroic myth. In the 19th century, with the emergence of modern Greece on the world stage, the name of Sparta was retrieved from the depths of history and once again resonated proudly. Near the ancient ruins, a new city arose, inheriting the glorious name, Sparta. Monuments were erected, streets acquired historical names, as if threads of the past were woven into the fabric of the present, recalling its former grandeur. But what was Sparta truly like? What legacy did this legendary myth actually leave behind? The truth proved to be far harsher and more ambiguous. Sparta's military triumphs were undoubtedly impressive, yet their foundation was surprisingly fragile. They relied on limited demographic resources, a brutal system of slave labor, and a rigid, unadaptable culture. While other Hellenic city-states boldly pursued innovation in politics, art, trade, and science, Sparta retreated into itself, finding its source of strength in uniformity and strict discipline. The unique institution of dual monarchy, intended to ensure stability, often became a cause of strife and confusion. At times when unity was vitally important, the kings frequently engaged in bitter conflicts. The power struggles between the ephors, the council of elders, and the royal authority sometimes paralyzed crucial decision-making. A system once designed to guarantee balance became shackles, hindering development. Sparta's economic model, based on the forced labor of the Helots and a complete lack of incentives for wealth accumulation, proved extremely vulnerable. During an era of flourishing trade in other Greek regions, Sparta sank into stagnation. With the loss of control over the Helots' lands, the entire system fractured and collapsed. Moreover, due to stringent demands and intolerance of dissent, a significant portion of citizens were excluded from public life, leading to a catastrophic decline in population. Even Sparta's legendary military might had its limits. Spartan hoplites, unparalleled in close-order combat, were remarkably inflexible and unable to adapt to new tactical approaches. They could not quickly replenish their losses. After the devastating defeat at the Battle of Leuctra, the myth of Spartan invincibility was shattered, and with it, much of Sparta's political influence evaporated. And yet, Sparta's iron discipline and the memory of its former greatness, or, rather, what it proclaimed itself to be, continued to exert influence for centuries. Not because of its victories, but because of what it symbolized. And this begs the question, was Sparta an example to emulate or a stark warning? It nurtured some of the most formidable warriors the ancient world had ever seen, men capable of marching in complete silence, dying without hesitation, and fighting as a single, cohesive unit. It created a society free from internal strife for centuries, with low crime rates, no civil wars, and unwavering loyalty to the state. But at what cost was this stability and order achieved? What price did Sparta pay for its glory? Sparta enslaved a large portion of its population, brutally suppressed any innovation, and viewed individuality as a mortal threat. The state lived in constant fear of revolts from the enslaved. Ultimately, Sparta proved incapable of adapting to change. The very rigidity and steadfastness that granted it power became its weakness and vulnerability. Sparta's greatness became the cause of its downfall. And yet, the myth of Sparta lives on through the ages. This story tells of how far a society can go in its pursuit of unity, how profound a people's belief in their ideal can be, and how boundless power, unchecked, turns into shackles. Even the most powerful cities can crumble, not under the onslaught of external enemies, but due to internal contradictions. The stone ruins silently preserve the memory of the past, but the name of Sparta continues to live. It stands at a crossroads between admiration and warning. Sparta became something more than just a city in a distant past. It is an idea projected onto every subsequent era. For warriors, Sparta serves as a model of unyielding discipline. For political theorists, it represents the extreme of collectivism, and for historians, it is a unique experiment in suppressing individuality for the common good. Military academies have adopted Spartan ideals for centuries. In Prussia, France, Great Britain, and later in the United States, the Spartanagoge training system was admired for its brutal effectiveness: train to exhaustion, no suffering from a young age, obey without question. Young cadets were told stories of King Leonidas, made to memorize the code of silence, and taught to endure pain stoically, without flinching. These lessons were not merely historical, they forged character. Modern totalitarian regimes also drew inspiration from Sparta's past. Fascist Italy under Mussolini openly championed Spartan principles: collective strength, a cult of physical training, national pride, and the suppression of the weak. Nazi Germany saw Sparta as a model of racial purity, a small elite ruling over a vast mass of inferiors. Hitler himself, according to some accounts, admired how Sparta controlled its enslaved Helot population, drawing parallels with his own objectives. This was a perverse interpretation, but it vividly demonstrates how flexible a myth can be and how easily it can be distorted. Liberal democracies struggled to define Sparta's place within their value systems. Spartan principles conflicted with the ideals of individual liberty, the right to self-expression, and universal equality, which are so cherished by democratic societies. Nevertheless, Sparta possessed an irresistible allure. It was a unique people who deliberately chose strict order over personal freedom, a readiness for self-sacrifice over the pursuit of pleasure, brevity over verbosity, and, strangely enough, achieved prosperity on this path, albeit for a specific historical period. The question arises, what lessons can be drawn from this experience? Or does it merely serve as a stark warning? Philosophical discussions never ceased. Was the Spartan system a model of harmony and virtue, or was it a despotic regime that reduced its citizens to mere instruments in the hands of the state? Plato admired Sparta's unwavering stability, seeing it as a guarantor of prosperity. Aristotle, conversely, criticized its economic structure, deeming it inefficient and incapable of adapting to changing conditions. Charles Montesquieu drew a parallel between Sparta and Rome, noting their fundamental difference: Sparta was rigid where Rome was flexible, and it was closed off to the outside world, while Rome was open to all that was new. Montesquieu asserted that Sparta could never have built a great empire because it was incapable of any change. And indeed, Sparta proved incapable of change. Its educational system remained static, failing to evolve with the times. The economy remained closed, making no effort to develop trade or introduce innovations. The demographic crisis that afflicted Sparta only worsened over time. While other states flourished through trade, scientific discoveries, and the colonization of new territories, Sparta stubbornly clung to the past, living on memories of its former glory. Even the women of Sparta, often praised for their relative freedom and independence, were trapped in deep contradictions. On the one hand, they wielded considerable power and influence in society, but this was primarily due to the men being constantly away on military campaigns. On the other hand, they owned land, but managed it not for their personal interests, but for the benefit of the state. Their strength and independence were directed not towards personal well-being, but towards maintaining a militarized society. With the collapse of that society, their role also crumbled. In art and literature, the image of Sparta continued to live on and be reinterpreted. In the 19th and 20th centuries, writers and filmmakers revisited its history, creating new interpretations of the Spartan myth. The story of the Battle of Thermopylae became a symbol of unequal struggle, heroism, and self-sacrifice for freedom. The feat of Leonidas and his warriors, standing against overwhelming enemy forces, has inspired and continues to inspire people worldwide. This story has been reflected in books, films, and educational materials. Modern interpretations, often stylized and exaggerated, have made Sparta part of popular culture. However, behind the images of fearless warriors and spectacular battle scenes lies a deeper, quieter truth. The real Sparta did not need loud shouts or displays of force. Its power lay in silence, discipline, and resilience. Today, the ruins of ancient Sparta present a rather modest sight. One won't find the majestic temples that Athens was famed for, nor grand theaters like Epidaurus. Only scattered stones and shadows across the valley hint at its former greatness. Yet, year after year, millions flock here, not to gaze upon meager remnants of the past, but to vividly imagine what Sparta was like in its heyday. They pause thoughtfully on the banks of the Eurotas, whose waters still flow. Their gaze turns towards the Taygetus Mountains, majestically rising to the west. They wander through silent fields where young Spartans once honed their martial skills, where kings marched, and where helots toiled under oppression. The very land holds the memory of bygone days, even if the stones remain silent. And perhaps this is Sparta's main paradox: a society seemingly built to defy time itself proved powerless against its destructive force. Yet the idea of Sparta, an idea of discipline, unyielding will, and relentless resilience, managed to survive centuries. To this day, in every era, humanity repeatedly asks the same questions: what are we willing to sacrifice for our own security? What do we gain in unity, and what do we lose in the process? And if greatness is only achieved through suffering, where is the line beyond which suffering becomes unbearable? Sparta compels us to seek answers to these questions, not through words, but through the choices we make. That is why it remains profoundly significant to us. Over time, the name Sparta gained a new lease of life, detaching itself from specific geographical and temporal confines. It transformed into a metaphor used across various human endeavors. In sport, Spartan became synonymous with tenacity, endurance, and iron discipline. In the philosophy of minimalism, it symbolizes the rejection of excess and the pursuit of simplicity. In politics, both authoritarian regimes and democratic leaders appeal to the image of Sparta, each extracting aspects from its history that align with their own ideological stances. This duality, a combination of admiration and fear, is what makes the image of Sparta so enduring in the human consciousness. For Sparta was not just another city-state, it was the embodiment of extremity, the far pole of a spectrum. A society that pushed certain ideals to their absolute limit and paid the full price for it. In academic circles, Sparta remains a subject of fierce debate and close scrutiny. For centuries, almost everything we know about this state has been gleaned from the writings of outsiders. The Spartans themselves left behind no literary works, historical chronicles, or philosophical treatises. Our knowledge of Sparta is based on the testimonies of Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, Plutarch, Athenians, Thebans, Romans. Some admired Sparta, others despised it, but none were Spartans. This creates a peculiar effect of silence. Sparta's voice is always heard only indirectly. We know far more about what others thought of Sparta than what the Spartans themselves thought of themselves. Their silence, a part of their harsh discipline, became a historical lacuna. The city that taught its citizens silence left behind the loudest and most resounding echo. The echo of Sparta. Modern archaeological investigations are beginning to lift the veil of silence over Sparta's history. Excavations in the regions of Laconia and Messenia have uncovered traces of ancient settlements, sacred sites, and defensive structures. At the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, famous for its ritual flogging of boys before a cheering crowd, numerous votive offerings have been found. Epigraphic finds, bone remains, and building ruins help reconstruct a picture of the daily lives of people who existed under the harsh conditions of Spartan life. Nevertheless, it must be acknowledged that our understanding of Sparta remains incomplete, as much of its history and culture has been irrevocably lost to time. However, it is precisely this historical lacuna that lends Sparta's image its particular flexibility and multifaceted nature. Each generation finds in it a reflection of its own ideals and fears. For those seeking order and stability in a chaotic world, Sparta appears as a model of clear organization, where law, hierarchy, and a common purpose dominate all else. For those who perceive a threat in tyranny, Sparta serves as a warning about the darker aspects of human nature, where the state suppresses individuality and freedom. In the eyes of educators and trainers, the agoge, the Spartan system of upbringing, becomes a symbol of the necessity of harsh trials for achieving future success. For the oppressed, the helots remain an eternal reminder of hidden suffering and injustice. Thus, Sparta continues to live in our consciousness, despite its historical remoteness. Sparta resists a singular interpretation, which makes it even more compelling for reflection. It seems to resist simplification, just as it once resisted change. It is remarkable that Sparta left behind so few material traces of its existence, yet exerted such an immense emotional impact on subsequent generations. Its modest ruins contrast with the grandeur of its myth, in which we see a reflection of ourselves. Are we willing to sacrifice comfort for strength? To forego freedom for security? Should we raise our children in obedience or encourage their curiosity? Every civilization must answer these questions. Sparta gave its answer, through silence, sacrifice, and steadfastness. And the world still listens to that answer. Today, the word Spartan resonates far beyond the valleys of Laconia. It finds reflection in training programs, moral principles, and advertising slogans. It is used to promote discipline, glorify endurance, popularize fitness, and advocate self-denial. However, most of those who use this word do not grasp its true meaning. To live in Sparta meant not merely to train diligently, but to subject oneself to the needs of the collective. Personal voice, will, and dreams were sacrificed to a higher authority, often unquestionable. From early childhood, Spartans were taught not to question, but merely to endure, obey, and die honorably if required. The Spartan experiment represented a unique attempt to create an ideal society, based on principles of virtue. The Spartans believed in the possibility of shaping not only physical strength but also the spiritual essence of a person. They sought to forge a perfect warrior, free from excess and weakness, through strict laws and rituals that tempered their soul like a blade. And for a certain period, they succeeded. Their warriors struck fear into enemies, society remained resistant to corruption, and culture avoided the decadence often accompanying power. However, achieving these ideals came at a high price. The Spartans proved incapable of adapting or expanding their identity. They were condemned to repeat the same behavioral patterns, which ultimately led to their decline. The last vestiges of Spartan culture gradually faded from the historical record, leaving behind no dramatic events, no burnt cities, no ultimate conquests. Their disappearance was due to slow erosion, declining birth rates, the concentration of land in the hands of a few, and a shrinking citizen class. Eventually, foreign armies passed by. Their lands, showing not the slightest interest, and silence returned to the region. Nevertheless, from this silence emerged a legacy that surpassed many empires in significance. The Spartans left the world no great libraries, majestic cathedrals, or philosophical schools, but they posed humanity a crucial question that everyone who seeks power must ask themselves: what are you willing to sacrifice to achieve greatness? Not every society must follow the Spartan path, but every society should at least ponder this question. That is why we turn to the history of Sparta again and again. And not merely to admire Leonidas' courage, to analyze Lycurgus' constitution, or to assess the scale of hoplite warfare, but also to reflect on ourselves. For in Sparta's history, in its rise, its austerity, its victories, and its fall, we discern a timeless truth: strength devoid of wisdom is destined to fail, unity not founded on compassion will sooner or later crumble, and power that lacks empathy becomes fragile and vulnerable. Sparta was neither a utopia nor a dystopia. It was a conscious choice made by real people, on real land, confronted by real fears. And it is precisely this choice, rather than the ruins or the myths, that remains Sparta's primary lesson. The city that spoke little continues to speak to us today.